Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the incident or the recent incident in New York where a pregnant white woman in her 30s was renting a bike from one of those rent-a-bike stands, push bike, and having just acquired the bike and pulled it out of the rental rack. She was, as I understand it from the media reporting, five young black men, teenagers, approached her and said that bike's ours. You have to give it to us. You took it from us, and so on. She had clearly rented it herself. I had the documents and the receipts and the numbers to prove it. So it was just a straight out street hustle, and they were hoping that this rather small in stature, pregnant white woman would just give way and say, "Yeah, look, here you go, you can have the bike." And I would say from their behaviour and demeanour, they've tried things on like this before and have got away with it. The white person just surrendered the item or the bike or whatever it might be to them, and they're just using a well-worn and in their view a successful hustle to get something for free that someone else had paid for. Now, in a serious world, that's called stealing or theft or intimidation, or it's a whole range of laws that, as I understand it, are being broken there. But if they can sort of bully you or intimidate you into giving it up, then hey, she gave it to me. She said I could have it. So that's anyway. There's a certain as more and more facts come out, or as the facts that were, I thought, pretty obvious from the outset, like this small pregnant woman tries to take on five black guys and get the bike from them. I mean, yeah, right. Who the fuck would believe that? But I just want to talk about what a lot of people, I guess, don't understand. If you haven't lived in or been exposed to a section of society that is very low trust, very violent, very deceitful, where trickery and treachery and underhanded hustles and intimidation and bullying are just natural sort of things that you encounter. There's no other way of living. That's how life is in that section of society, or it can be a country. Those attitudes are very common in Africa, for example. So if you haven't lived in that type of society or that type of area in society, then you don't understand it. You're almost sort of bewildered by what do I do here? Whoa, well, what's this? Why is this person saying their bike is theirs when it's clearly not? So things like respect for property and are consistent with certain lifestyles and ways of living, attitudes of living, that respect for property is something that's not as prevalent in other sections of society. So these are considerations that have to be taken into account, or issues that have to be taken into account. So now, as I've mentioned many times before, I've travelled the world on business, many times over and for many years. In fact, still do some of it. And one thing that struck me when I started travelling was I assumed the level of social trust, in the wider trust in society, in each other, in our institutions, and in respect for certain institutional types of behaviour, such as respect for property. That was the same, give or take. That was the same sort of all over the world. Maybe not in the poorest countries, but certainly as a general rule, I expected that level of social trust to be in the rest of the world. But once I got outside of the first world white countries, and there was even a variance there, not a big one, but a variance nonetheless. When I got outside of the white countries, then the amount of social trust was much lower. In fact, in some countries, it was barely evident at all. And hustling and living on the street, living by your mischievous, treacherous, underhanded wits, that rat cunning and that sort of thing. That seemed to be a way of behaving in other countries that I was quite surprised by it. Also, even in countries where the people there who maybe were first, second, third generation migrants, and they'd come from societies where various forms of persecution or civil war, constant invasion, or something were pretty much how they lived, and they still carried that attitude on, even though they were separated from it by 100 years or more. And that surprised me as well. Even in parts of Central Europe where they're used to endless wars and endless invasions and so on, their attitude to private property and wealth that was not mobile. You might keep gold bars and diamonds under the floorboards of your house, or you would try and be highly educated, so your wealth creation capacity was within your own skills, that sort of stuff. So there was a difference there, and I found that a little bit strange when I first encountered them. You get used to it and you work around and you deal with it and so on, but they have a much different view of social trust. Having known someone for a long time is a social, rather than assuming someone will behave in a certain way given a certain situation. So I would, for example, I would find in negotiating business deals, I would say to somebody because I don't want to have to revisit the deal and be involved in sort of ongoing conflict as part of the business contract. So I could look at the contract and say, well, no, if you go down that path, if you want this added on, that's going to box you in and that's going to put you into a tight corner over here. That's not going to work out. That'll lead to conflict. You're not going to make money out of that. That will lead you to be less energetic in pursuing the commercial goals that we both want to share. So I would have to advise them not to go down certain paths because of the disadvantage it will create initially to them and then to both of us, as in the two business parties. So they were quite confused and perplexed by this. Well, why would you do that? If what you say is true, you have an opportunity to screw us for a few months until we wake up to that fact. Why would you not take advantage of that opportunity to screw us for a few months, make a few more bucks until we wise up? The mere fact you're telling us about this and doing means you've actually got a super underhanded piece of treachery on the go that's so devilishly clever that we can't even see it or understand it. Holy fuck, we've got to really be on our guard now. And they took that out. You have to try and calm them down enough to be able to understand it. No, listen, let me explain this. Okay, A, B, C, and you'd have to go through it with them, and they look and go, no, there's still something. You are super clever, trying to cheat us out of something. And eventually you could get them to understand what was going on. But because their society has no concept of social trust and then how it feeds out into business trust and other areas of trust, they can't accept or can't understand or just can't get their head around it. I even had this problem in parts of Germany. And other parts of Europe where they've got a long tradition of being invaded and so on, where they can't understand. Now the social trust in Germany, frankly, is much higher than places in Africa, for example. But I encountered this around. But once you get to third world countries, then the hustle, the cheating, the underhanded, all sorts of things, and then the standover. You can get to a point in a business discussion where, I don't think that's going to work, Billy Bob. So you calling me an asshole, you motherfucker? Do we have to go outside and sort this out man to man? That's holy fuck. And the guy doesn't know that I do martial arts and everything, so I'm not sure he'd be so big and tough if he knew that. But you don't need that aggravation, so you have to calm them down. But coming now to sort of coming to parts of the United States, my experience is that my experience with black people in the US, with some exceptions, is the preparedness, certainly on the heat, on the street and so on, to engage in the hustle. I mean, I was walking down a street in Dallas one day, and a black guy who was inside like a doorway, and I hadn't seen him, and I was looking around. I think it might have been my first time in Dallas actually, and he suddenly came out of the doorway and walked straight into me, and took me by surprise. He then insisted that I had bumped into him, and I'd walked into him, and I'd seen him, and I'd done it on purpose. And he was going to make a big deal out of this, but if I give him $10, he'll let it go, but just this once, and I better watch out in the future. Yeah, right. Fuck off now. But those sort of things, I sort of noticed. If you took a wrong turn in the street or something, you'd suddenly find yourself in an area where it was looked rather down at heel, and where these sort of antics went on. Another one, I was somewhere in New York, and these black shoe shiner, a group of black shoe shiners, they threatened and used a lot of very racist slurs, by the way. They threatened violent action if I didn't get my shoes shined by them. Now, bear in mind, I'm a young and really fit sort of dude, and they'd sort of look at, well, this is not an easy target. We're probably going to get hurt if we try and do something to this guy. So why don't we find an easier target? So they didn't do anything, but the threat was there. Another time, I was on in a third world country. I came out of the airport, and these goons were trying to sell me something or other. I can't remember what it was now, like some sort of souvenir type thing from that part of the world, and I said no thanks. And next thing, guys threatening to stick me with a blade if I don't buy it. Yeah, right. Whenever you're ready, motherfucker. So these are the sort of things can go on, and this is the behaviour that you kind of accept in some places, in some societies, and people from those societies will behave in a certain way. And for those who don't know, they look at it and sort of they can't get their head around, they can't understand it. Do these things actually go on? I've never encountered that. And if you don't sort of encounter these people, and people who live in these sort of places or suburbs or ghettos or societies, you don't really know that that's how people live there, and those are their attitudes. So the attitude of going up to someone, why don't you give me that bike? You stole it from me. You called me an asshole. That sort of thing. That's very typical of those sort of people, where they live as, the street hustle is how they live. It's what they do. And they pick easy targets. And this nurse, this pregnant, quite small pregnant nurse, was an easy, or was perceived as an easy target. When she started calling out help, I think she's rather fortunate that they didn't move to snuff her out entirely. But anyway, that's so. But I want to talk about sort of my first sort of real experience with this was as a kid. I'm just trying to remember. As a kid, we moved temporarily. I don't know, I was probably 8 years old or something, maybe a bit young, so sort of around that age. And we moved to an area I have to go back in time here, but where the folks were getting another place. And so we were there for maybe a month or two. And this was right next to a housing estate where, there was a lot of people that even as a kid, they looked at them and the parents, and they seemed to be, as far as I could tell, retarded. And so, the kids sort of, around my age. And I remember these kids sort of said, well, why don't you come into, come in here, look at this. This is, and there was some new house being built, I think it was. And these other kids said, come in here, go in there, have a look. No, go and have a look. So I was like, I went in. So, well, I don't know, what are they pointing to? And then the kids, they stayed out the front, and then they called out, hey, Mr. Smith, look, Billy Bob's in the house. Look, Mr. Smith, hey, Mr. Smith. And so, and then, it was like urgent cries and appeals. And then this adult guy, the Mr. Smith came up, and I think he was maybe the builder or something, I don't know, caretaker. What are you doing there, son? Yeah, I'm going to call the cops. Your parents will have to pay. And I thought, what's he talking about? What on earth's going on? And the kids the group was smirking and looking very pleased with themselves. So they sort of managed to engage in this deception. Next thing you know, I've got my someone on the front door of my my parents saying, look, Billy Bob's probably done this. And fortunately, the evidence they had was that he was there, and so I explained what had happened. And the builder guy, seemed to accept this and go, okay, all right, then you were set up. I get it. And but it's an indication of the sort of people live. And I remember as a kid, I can't understand, why would they do that? What on earth would they? And you're living with people who the street hustlers thing. Now, fast forward, I don't know, a number of years, a similar sort of scenario was going. The folks were getting a house renovated, and so they were putting a new house. They putting every nickel they had into the reno, and so we were staying in a very cheap accommodation, and which was, I think it was close to where the folks worked or something like that. And by now I'd be 11, say. And this was an area that had a large number of migrant camps from the Mediterranean basin, sort of Lebanon, Egypt, and that sort of thing, and Jordan and so on. I'd never sort of encountered this sort of thing previously, and the majority of kids in the school were actually non-white. So I went to the local high school, and I'd never seen. This is 11-year-old kids walking around with flick knives and smoking cigarettes, and the police were around every day, and there was kids were bringing like nooses to school to hang. To get some other kid and hang them over the parallel bars. I mean, literally put a noose around them and try to hang them. It was an insane sort of place, and sort of behaviours that I'd never encountered before, and so wow, and it seemed like a very alien sort of place. But the kids were, the Arabic kids in particular would just come up to you in the playground and say, you called me an asshole, didn't you? Yeah, you did. And they try and extort your lunch money from you, or extort something from you, or give us your sandwiches and I'll let you off type stuff. And they'd go around in gangs, sort of intimidating people who or attempting to intimidate, fellow students or pupils by doing this, and all sorts of other tactics they'd use. And the reason this sort of comes to mind is the bike. The bike was there. There were like school bike racks, and they are. That's my bike you've got there. Yes, you did. You took it from me. You stole it. And there were endless amounts of hustles they had to extort, goods or even services, even down to like if you bought an ice cream on a hot summer's day, or you bought some sort of confectionery or chocolate or something from the school canteen. They would. There was gangs of them used to wait around the thing. So when you bought something, they'd come up and demand with menaces that you give them the chocolate you just bought, or the ice cream. And if you refused, they would. There'd be a scuffle where they tried to get it out of your hand, and then if that wasn't successful, they'd knock it onto the ground and then stamp on it so you couldn't have it. And yet the white kids didn't do this. It was exclusively an Arabic way of behaving. Now, they'd come from civil war-torn sort of places and this sort of stuff, but they had no concept of private property. It seemed that they just didn't know what it meant, or that it was any respect if they could extort something out of you. Now, some of the games they play, the teachers started to sort of do patrolling the area to watch out for sort of this, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. So I think some of them didn't really want to be doing this sort of thing, and sometimes the teachers would end up in punch-ups with these Arabic students, which again, something I'd never seen before. So here you've got like an 11-year-old Arabic kid, and if the teacher catches them doing something, the Arabic kid just takes a swing at the teacher. This is so respect for authority, respect for these people. And listening to the Arabic kids talk back then, they would say, well, that guy's not Arabic. Why should I take any notice of what he says? Only other Arabic people and village elders, people of respect, the religious people, only they have a right to tell me. Anyone else has no right to tell me what to do. They have no moral or other authority. I don't recognize their legal authority, and so on. And this was something that struck me as incredible. I, as an 11-year-old kid, just couldn't believe it. But they used those same tactics of intimidation and dispossession and all sorts of things like that, and they viewed that as quite normal. They had other sort of odd sort of behaviours that, again, I'd never encountered and sort of couldn't quite understand why anybody would want to behave this way. One of them would go in and defecate in the middle of the change room on a sports day, and then their gangs would congregate around the doorway, and they would grab white kids as they would come into the change room and try and push them into the turds that they just the turds they just left in the middle of the floor. And I thought, well, why would somebody want to do that? Other things, like they would drop turds in the wash basins, the hand wash basins and so on, and they would think it was hilarious. They would sort of really get off on this. And now, needless to say, the police were around every day. There were public canings in this school where I know you get the odd one or two white kids, I guess, but where these Arabic kids were being caned and so on. Sometimes the attempt at caning, the Arabic kid would try and beat up the teacher. And I missed it. Yeah. And I'd never seen something like that. That was how they behaved, and they came from those sort of areas where you would avoid it. Even I remember the folks would give me money to go and get, a loaf of bread down the shop, something like that. So we'll go and get a loaf of bread and, a pint of milk or whatever. And it was really running the gauntlet. I said, no, I don't want to do it. Go and get it at the supermarket. Because there was a laneway in between sort of where we lived and down where, you could get, it was a shortcut to the shops in effect. But the gangs used to hang, not always Arabic, by the way, the gangs used to hang around those laneways and how much money have you got? And you better give it, you better hand it over, or we're going to, I don't remember one time, I wouldn't hand the money over, and I got a serious pasting by guys who were like twice my size. And so you had to take the long way around in order to get to the shop where it was less likely you'd get waylaid. But these were the sort of things. So when I see things like this business in New York, the bike and everything, I can relate to the sort of situation that would have led up to it, the society that these people would have come from, and their attitude to scams and hustles to dispossess others of their property. This is quite normal in those societies and those cultures, quite normal. That's how they do business. That's how they live every day. And that they probably think it's amusing to look at the bewildered expression on the faces of the white people they're trying to dispossess, because typically most white people don't have any experience at that sort of way of living, those sort of attitudes and those sort of views, and those sort of hustles and that sort of thing. So, but when I see that, I relate back to those past experiences there and go, well, no, I do understand that, but most people don't. Now, I've mentioned it to a couple of people around this sort of thing, but their response is, well, no, it must have been racism. No. Who would go up to somebody and say, that's my bike if it wasn't? Nobody would do that. So it must have been. as the media say, wicked, evil, fucking fascist, Nazi, fucking racist, Hitler, white people. It must have been that. What else could it be? There's no other explanation. Nobody, unless they're crazy, would go up to someone and say, that's my bike, when they know it's not. People just don't do that. Most people don't do it. But there's a decent enough, a decent number of people that do it, and that is their way of life. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.